There's a certain stillness that comes with age. At 50, I thought I had figured life out, at least the parts that mattered. I had already faced the loss of my husband, Musa, 12 years ago, a pain so deep that I never imagined anything could hurt that much again. We had built a thriving car spare parts business together, a labor of love and hard work. After he died, I poured myself into keeping the business alive, keeping his memory alive. It wasn't until I met Brian, a 32-year-old man full of charm and life, that I realized I was still capable of love. Or so I thought. He came into my life when I least expected it. Handsome, ambitious, and sweet-talking, Brian brought a kind of energy that I hadn't felt in years. I was hesitant at first. After all, the age difference was glaring, and what could someone so much younger possibly want with me? But his persistence wore me down. He showed interest in my business, helping out when things got tough and providing fresh ideas that I hadn't considered. He seemed genuinely invested in my success. And over time, I let him into more than just my life. I let him into my business. He even introduced me to Joyce, his so-called sister, a quiet, respectful woman who I thought of as family. Little did I know they were plotting against me the entire time. Everything came crashing down one sunny Monday. I'll never forget that day. I walked into my shop in Nairobi's industrial area to find it completely cleaned out. Shelves that had once held valuable stock were bare, my office ransacked, and my bank account drained. At first, I thought it was a robbery, but when I couldn't get hold of Brian or Joyce, the sinking realization hit me. They had conned me. I felt the weight of betrayal crush my chest as the pieces of their deceit fell into place. Joyce wasn't Brian's sister. She was his girlfriend, his partner in crime. Together, they had played me for a fool, slowly siphoning off money from the business and selling stock behind my back. I had handed them the keys to my life, and they had taken everything. For days, I couldn't leave the house. The shame, the humiliation of being conned by a man so much younger, by people I trusted, was unbearable. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? It took me weeks to come to terms with the fact that I had lost everything, again. I had already rebuilt my life once after Musa's death, and now I was faced with the same terrifying reality of starting from scratch. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't have Musa's memory to keep me going. Instead, I had to face myself, the woman I had neglected, the woman who had given so much of herself to others that she forgot who she really was. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning. The tears dried up, but the pain still fresh. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. I had spent so many years trying to fill the void that Musa left, trying to hold on to something, whether it was my business or my relationship with Brian, that I had lost sight of who I really was. So I made a decision. This time, my journey wasn't going to be about finding someone else to heal me. It was about finding myself again, rebuilding my business, a story of persistence. The first step was practical. I had no money left, no stock, and no resources to rebuild the business. But I wasn't going to let the betrayal define me. I had spent years building relationships in the car spare parts industry, and I knew that while I had lost trust in people close to me, there were others who had stood by me through thick and thin. I started by reaching out to old suppliers, explaining my situation with brutal honesty. Some turned me away, but others, seeing my resilience and the reputation I had built over the years, agreed to work with me on credit. It wasn't easy to ask for help, but I learned that vulnerability could be a strength. I negotiated deals with payment terms that allowed me to get my hands on the products I needed without paying upfront. It wasn't glamorous. I downsized drastically. I moved out of my beautiful Karen home into a small apartment in Nong. I sold personal belongings to cover basic expenses, and I took on the role of managing the business myself, something I hadn't done in years. I spent long nights in the shop, reorganizing stock, meeting customers, and figuring out how to streamline operations to cut costs. With time, I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about getting the business back on its feet. It was about rediscovering the passion I had when Musa and I started it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't relying on anyone else. I was calling the shots, and in doing so, I found confidence that had been buried under years of self-doubt. As my business slowly began to recover, so did I. I joined a local women's group where I met other women who had faced similar betrayals, who had been forced to start over in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. Hearing their stories gave me perspective and strength. We shared our struggles, our fears, and our triumphs. I wasn't alone on this journey. I wasn't the only one who had been burned by love or had to rebuild a life from the ashes. But more than anything, I learned how to be kind to myself. I began to understand that starting over didn't mean I had failed. It meant that I was resilient enough to face whatever life threw my way. I had survived the death of a husband. I had survived betrayal. And through it all, I had found a strength within me that I never knew I had. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone. I no longer needed validation from a man, from society, or even from my business. What I needed was to reconnect with myself, to learn to love myself again, in my own skin, at my own pace, and on my own terms. At 50, society expects women to settle down, to quietly retreat into a life of domesticity, especially after facing the kind of hardships I had. But I chose to rewrite that narrative. My success wasn't about finding a new partner or growing my business to its former glory. It was about reclaiming my life, my self-worth, and my future. I enrolled in business courses to refine my skills and joined a mentorship program where I now help younger women avoid the same mistakes I made. I started meditating, hiking, and painting. Things I hadn't done in years because I had been so consumed by work and relationships. Today, my business is thriving again. But more importantly, I am thriving. I've learned that true success is internal. It's about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and refusing to let life's challenges break you. A message to women starting over. If you're reading this and you're at a crossroads, whether you're starting over after a heartbreak, betrayal, or some other form of loss, know this. You have the strength to rebuild. You have the power to reclaim your life, even when it feels like everything has crumbled around you. Don't let the world tell you that age defines you. Don't let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Whether you're 40, 50, or 60, you can still reinvent yourself. You can still chase dreams, learn new things, and, most importantly, love yourself in ways you never thought possible. I lost everything, but in the process, I found the most important thing I had been missing all along, myself.